Hello everybody, welcome to Cooking Up Virtual Events. I'm delighted if you're able to join us live. If you're watching this on the recording, hello to you too. I am joined here by the amazing Paul Cook. Paul, how are you? Thank you for joining me this morning.
Well, I'm very well, and with an intro like that, I mean, what can I say? Great adjective. So yeah, no, really happy to be here, and thank you for having me on your show.
Perfect. And where are you right now, Paul? I'm in Denmark, in southern Denmark. Where are you located right now?
Okay, so I'm just outside London in England, in a little place called Oxted in Surrey. So it's about half an hour train ride going south towards the Brighton coast.
Perfect. And if you're watching this on the recording, please say hello. Just drop a comment below the video on LinkedIn or on Twitter or on YouTube or on Facebook, wherever you're watching. Just say hello and let us know where you're watching from. We're always curious to see where in the world people are. And particularly if you know Paul or you know myself, just give us a wave, say, give a hello, and we'll make sure to bring a few of you on the screen. It's always fun to have you actually with us in the stream rather than just watching in the comments. So yeah. Ruud is here already with us. Break-a-legged Paul, Miguel and Paul, glad to join and reminisce about Event Camp Europe. And he already puts in a Twitter handle, very good. We have a LinkedIn user from Dubai. Unfortunately, sometimes LinkedIn does this. It doesn't let me know who that person is, just a LinkedIn user. So if you know who you are, just drop your name as well so everybody knows who you are. We have Tobia Salvadori from Italy. Hello, Tobia. Nice to see you on here. We have Sarah Merriman over from Southampton, UK. Not a million miles away from you there, Paul, right? So that's always nice.
About an hour and a half.
Milda, my old IMEX colleague from Amsterdam. We have Ingrid in the Netherlands. Curious to listen in. Thank you for joining us once again, Ingrid. Patrick Delaney over in Ireland. Always good to see you virtually, Patrick. Ruud just comments that he's over in Switzerland, so that's nice. Ana Bueno over in Barcelona, hopefully a sunny Barcelona. Pier Paolo in the Dolomites, says Ballo from the Dolomites, okay. We have Mette Vil from Denmark here. Hey, a fellow Danish, fellow person from Denmark. We have also Antonio Cazula in Switzerland with a Podio box. There we go. Yvonne Morguet over from Italy. And Erica, this is someone who I know very well, and I know Paul knows very well, over in Yorkshire. Hi, hello chaps, she says, very British. Dora Murgo from Kudo, I think that's the LinkedIn user that we mentioned earlier. And Sina is also on with us from Germany. Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody who's already said hello. Could you also, if you were at Event Camp or any of the Event Camp Europe events, or have heard of Event Camp before, just let me know in the comments as well. I really would love to get an understanding if we're talking to an audience that has never heard of this event and is just curious, or an audience who has some history, knows a little bit about the event. It'd be great to just understand that. So just let us know in the comments if you know event camps quite well, and we'd love to know that. And Mireille over from The Hague as well. So quite a few of our Dutch friends watching. No pressure, Paul.
Never.
So I think we should start, from the top and just kind of explain what is this thing, Event Camp Europe, that we're here to talk about. Just so to give everybody a bit of context, if it's your first time watching, I'm running a series of events called Cooking Up Virtual Events, where I interview people who've organized interesting virtual events or who are about to organize virtual events that we find interesting in some sense. And in this case, Paul and I are going to be discussing an event that happened almost 10 years ago. And I was a speaker, or a lab rat, as I described in my blog post that I wrote about it afterwards, that I recently found online again. And Paul was one of the key organizers. And now I think it's fair to explain that Event Camp, there was a series of event camps in the US. And I think the first one was one in New York that I traced back the early Twitter messages about it on Twitter yesterday. And I think it's February 2010 was the first one. And then there was a series of ones, Event Camp Twin Cities, Event Camp West Coast, I believe. And then it shot over to Europe, Event Camp Europe, which is the one I participated in, which was, I believe, September of 2011, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
All right. So we have a few people saying, sorry, don't know anything about the event that we're talking about. So it's great. I think we should start from this, assume no previous knowledge, which I think is always a good place to start. But tell us a little bit about, that first how you heard about it, Paul, how you got involved, and how it all came together.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. And it's really interesting to be here as a guest because I see a number of your shows and they're always great discussions. So you do a marvelous job on those. And I think it was that kind of style of approach that that happened when I first found out about event camps. And the first one, as you said, went back to 2010 in New York. And it was really because a group of people that were passionate about the events industries decided to find out how they could really push the barriers. What could they really do that would make a difference to events? What could they do to shape them, to inform them, to make them better for everybody? And so these people got together, they decided we're going to do these things and just chat. I think the first time they met was purely a chat around a restaurant table about, here's some tech, what can we do? And it all sprang from there. And I remember that I was on social media, I was on Twitter quite a lot of the time, and I attended one of these events as a virtual delegate. And I sent in a little tweet, and I sent this tweet in, and I knew some of the people that were going to be in the audience. It was a hybrid event because you had in-person physical space, attendees there, but you also had people like me, virtual attendees as well. And so I sent this tweet down, and then lo and behold, the host got hold of my tweet. He read it out. I couldn't believe it. It's like, I'm in this event. And I could feel that other people were also saying, wow, yeah, okay, Paul over in the UK, brilliant to have you in. And that, for me, Miguel, was the start of a very long journey into understanding how we could develop events that appealed not only to people that were physically at a location, but also in either remote or virtually as well. And so we attended a number of these event camps going on in the States. And then I got to know Ruud Janssen through MPI because we did some work as MPI presidents together. He was in Netherlands chapter, I was in the UK chapter. We both happened to be leading at the same time. We were doing an exchange. We also knew some people over in the States, so Janice Fryer and Lindsay Rosenthal. And basically the four of us just had this mad idea of getting together and putting an event camp on in Europe. And so we decided that it would be good to have it in the UK, but we wanted to also develop a little bit further on some of the things that we'd seen that worked well in the States. So how could we take the next reincarnation? And bearing in mind, Miguel, none of this is, we weren't being paid anything for this. This was a tireless endeavor. It was volunteer, it was love, it was blood, sweat and tears as well. But we wanted to help shape the industry, help shape the sector in whatever way we could. And so
absolutely,
what that meant was that we came up with this idea of putting this event camp on in Europe, and then going out and seeing who might be able to sponsor little bits of it and help us along the way. So we ended up, because we were on a shoestring, we ended up in a country house hotel in the middle of England, as you do, and it was a 13th century building. So the walls were about as thick as I am, in terms of width and everything. So for Wi-Fi and all of those streamings, terrible idea. But
probably not the most ideal venue ever, right? For a hybrid event, a pioneering hybrid event that's trying to cater for an online audience. It wasn't ideal. There's some great anecdotes about that, right? I think, but let's not go into details just yet. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. I realized I didn't introduce Paul Cook. If anybody doesn't know who Paul is, I know a lot of people do. I first met Paul Cook when I was a student in London at the University of Westminster, and Paul was president of the UK and Ireland chapter. And Paul was doing a student initiative and came in to speak at the university. We did some fun activities of networking and connecting between people. And I ended up actually being president of MPI UK and Ireland chapter a few years later, I think 5 or 6 presidents after Paul, but it was kind of a whole journey, and Paul was one of the first people that really inspired me to kind of do that. So I'm always thankful to Paul, and particularly in the European MPI conference 2008, the EMEC conference, which was held in London. I ended up volunteering because, to be perfectly honest, I couldn't afford the registration fee. So I pestered Paul for about 2 months to see if I could volunteer and have some sort of role, and then ended up at the registration, just helping out with registration, and ended up helping with Spot Me, which was giving out these big, bulky devices that everybody had at the conference, which was kind of exciting at the time. I don't think anybody would be caught dead with a device like the size of maybe 3 cell phones put together to walk around with. But at the time, it was the latest thing, and this was just before the iPhone and all that. So I think there were Blackberries, but they were also quite bulky at that point. So this is kind of an exciting time in history with Event Camp comes along. You have Twitter has just really started, and I think what's fascinating is there's this like event profs community that comes together on Twitter and becomes a real kind of energy.
Yes.
There was a real kind of energy about it, right? It was sort of like nobody was really getting paid, or there was no real financial model yet. A little bit like startups, I guess, but everybody was just excited that there was this tool called Twitter where you could speak your mind and share your thoughts. And if you remember the original kind of early versions of Twitter, there was no images on Twitter. You were stuck on 140 characters. And if I just went through the tweets from the original Event Camp, and actually reading through them is incredibly boring because also retweets were manual. So anytime you wanted to retweet, which is like to share on LinkedIn, you have to go RT and then basically quote the rest of the tweet. And it's just, if you read them back, it's incredibly like hard to follow anything because you just have these little blurbs of text that a lot of them just repeat themselves because everybody's retweeting each other, which is great. But as a sort of like viewer, it's terrible. It's unwatchable compared to today's standards where, everything is much more graphical. But I think that's just curious. And also Google Hangouts had just started. And I think that was a big part of, I guess, we were at that cusp where technology was just able enough to pull off this kind of idea of hybrid event, and the cost and the way to connect an event happening with a live stream and have interactivity was just starting to be possible. And I think event camps were kind of going, wow, this is interesting. We can do some really neat stuff here. Let's explore this. And I think that was probably the most exciting part about all these events, right?
And I think that was a really good summary of how it came to be, because you're right, Twitter was 2008, 2009, maybe around that time when it started to become more kind of mainstream. And I think it was there, as you rightly say, that event profs put the hashtag on and then started finding people. I mean, I found, my relationship with Janice Wright and Lindsay Rosenthal started on Twitter. Didn't start anywhere else. Didn't start from me meeting them. It started from, we got on and we shared things, and, there was a lot of sharing and camaraderie. It was all very collegiate, I think, in the event space. And it pretty much still is today as well, to be fair. I think we, as a sector, we try to help each other. I know we're always in competition as well, which is a bit, but that goes with the territory where we're still trying to improve what we do all the time. And that's really where these event camps started from. So, yeah.
And I think it's interesting when you do something like this, you don't really think about competition. I mean, there was a lot of people involved that maybe would see themselves as competition, in a sort of normal business setting. But because it was so exciting, it was kind of like, can we make, can we not lose money is probably the first one of the thoughts. But in general, it was just like there's a community building here, and there's a lot of people involved, really kind of giving up their time, which is really great. I wanted to bring up a few of the comments. Tobias says, sorry, doesn't know the event. That's okay, Tobias. Hopefully you find it interesting as well. Rude was a big part of this event and other event camp events, so we'll come to that in a second. But Rude, thank you for being with us. I know you can't join us for the whole event, but it's always good to have you. He says he spent a couple of hours, days, weeks at event camp, so he knows them well. Yvonne says hello. It's the first time she's been here. And Heidi, a previous guest, she's interested in hearing more about event camp. Also want to welcome Celine, who says hello from France. She's been organizing virtual events since 11 months. And yeah, we're talking about an event now almost 10 years ago. So hopefully you can find some interesting things there as well. I think she also asks which software we're using. I just wanted to say we're using a software called StreamYard. Just go to StreamYard.com. It was recently purchased by Hopin, but for the moment, at least, it is a separate software. So we're using that to stream on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Most people, I think, are watching on LinkedIn. But if you're not watching on LinkedIn, drop a line in the comments. They'll also show up here. And we'd love to have a comment from somebody not watching on LinkedIn. Always fun. Ruth says, the cook is in the kitchen. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. and James, nice to see you on your hair. James has a little giggle about that. What is it? Time warp, see behind the screens. Oh yeah, and Rude highlights some of the images that we're just about to show about the event. So let's jump into that, because I wanted to give everybody a bit of an idea of what this actually looked like. So it's easy for us to just like chat about it, but if we can show people what it actually looked like, I think we'll get a lot more done. So I'm just going to show a little kind of photo share here. I'm going to take Rude off the screen. And what are we looking at here? I guess we can just go through.
So what
this is?
This is so Emily Barter is the lady on the left as you look at that picture. Liz with the big name badge to give you the clue there in purple. Liz was one of the sponsors actually. She was Metro Broadcast, and without her, we wouldn't have been able to pull this event off because it was all shoestring. But Emily Barter was the virtual host. So she was the person that was always connecting with everybody that couldn't be seen, everybody outside the physical space. And she was the connection into that. So she showed people how to know where to go, what to do on their devices, what was coming up, all of those kind of good things, which is so important today as well. So that was that. And
I'm just going to zoom into this photo to explain to people. So Paul is there on the stage with Rude, and I think they're doing maybe the introduction or some part of the live event, and that's where the speakers were. Pretty minimal setup, but there was lights, there was cameras, everything was there was sound. And then we have Emily off to the side, and what was happening was there was a camera positioned roughly where the camera is here, where this photographer is. And that camera would only focus on Emily and that other screen that said Savile Audiovisual right now. So she would be speaking to the audience in between sessions. So when there was somebody speaking on stage, we would stream live to the online audience. And then when there wasn't somebody on stage, we were in a lunch break, or just when there was more kind of in-room activity going on, we would cut to Emily interacting with the audience. And I think it was mainly on Twitter that people would be commenting and interacting. So she would be constantly typing away on Twitter, and that's why she had a computer there as well, but also just getting those comments and kind of engaging with people online. And just before I forget, there was also pods, and I'll jump to this image to kind of do the whole explanation of this setup. So on the screen, every once in a while, we'd show the pods. So there was particular areas in the world, particularly in Sweden and in Poland, there was groups of students that got together in a room, with a projector and Google Hangouts in this case, which is kind of an old Google Chat functionality. Which would kind of watch everything live, and every once in a while we'd cut to them. Maybe there was a bit of interaction or a group discussion, and we would get their input. And this is truly hybrid event in that sense. Not always easy, not always smooth, and very basic tools here. We're not using a professional. The cameras and everything feeding into Google Hangouts was professional, but then once you're in Google Hangouts, it's a little bit like having a Skype call or something. It was a little hit and miss, but I believe the experience was pretty positive for everybody, even in those pods.
Well, I think the Google Hangouts had been out probably about 5 or 6 weeks, and then we decided to use that particular new tech to do that. And the reason that you see the Swedish flag so prominent there is because we said to the hub, the pod, the cluster, whatever you want to call it, we said, right, let us know that you're with, where we are. And these guys actually, I don't know if you remember, Miguel, but what we did after the lunch break, we actually flipped from having everything come out from the main headquarters, if you like it, in the country house, and we flipped it across so that in Sweden, they were doing a stretching exercise that the rest of the people, not only in that pod, but also in Hertfordshire and in other places around, and other virtual delegates could all take part in. So we wanted to experiment. Could we actually hand over kind of the lead to another hub? And of course you could, and that works. So we mustn't forget Belgium as well. And we also had a little, we also had a hub in actually in the location that we were, to see if that would work and what that would be like, because we wanted to test the experience across. Okay, you come as a in-person delegate, you're used to that, great. What's it like as a virtual delegate? What's it like to be part of a pod? So yeah, we had a lot going on, I think.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was truly hybrid event, truly experimental, which I think was really interesting. A few more photos I wanted to share. This is what the audience in-house looked like. We were pretty cramped in there, and I think there's an interesting anecdote about why we were in this hotel, but we'll come to that in a second. But it was a small room with a lot of people and a lot of equipment, And here we have a picture of some of the equipment, which, as you can tell, is a little bit dated now. We have a few laptops, we have a sound mixer, a video mixer, and also we have this media site kind of stream in a box, I think, something like that, which was sort of a kind of a PC desktop that then was made into this carry case, and that was powering the, I think there's two of them, there's another one over here, powering the stream, if I'm not mistaken. So that was sort of taking relatively, high quality video feed and kind of beaming it over the internet. Unfortunately, I've clicked on a bunch of media site links and none of these are live anymore. So it's a real shame. It'd be really interesting to see what that looks like these days. But I believe they were live for quite a while afterwards, and you could kind of review the content.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was capturing the content that was the key. So there you go. There's the four co-producers, all of us on stage, and then Emily off to the side.
Mm-hmm. That was really, so that's Ruud, Janice Fayette,
Lindsay Rosenthal,
and yourself, on the stage.
That's when in the days we actually had dark hair. This is outside.
And this is also
the physical venue. So if you were at Hertfordshire House, this is what you might do. I remember you and Andrew Walker playing a game of the big Connect 4 there, whilst we were doing studio interviews for the virtual delegates in the other part.
Exactly. So the people managing the virtual stream had no breaks. They were just constantly online, which is pretty brutal. But I guess that's just how it is when you're trying to interact with people on different time zones and different schedules, right?
And I think also at that stage, Miguel, we were probably a little bit scared that they might just all disappear off, because we didn't know. This was 10 years ago. We weren't sure how the engagement was going to work. We know that you can't bombard people with info. It doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work now. But we wanted to try a few things. So we built this event as being lab rats, were you going to help us on this? So this was never going to be a perfect event, because we wanted to scratch the surface of what else was possible. And we felt that if you didn't have that safe space, how on earth would we advance the industry? If every organization expects something to be perfect, where do you go to test? So we wanted to test some of this stuff to destruction, which is what we did. This is Janice Fayette doing an improv on the stage here. So
some audience interaction with some people that weren't expecting to come on stage, which I remember was really uncomfortable for about 30 seconds, and then we all started laughing, which was great. There's Brant Kruger, I believe, showcasing a webcam, but I'm not actually sure that is a webcam. It's some kind of device, USB device.
One of the program highlights in there was hands-on tech lab. So I dare say that that's probably what he was doing at the time. So showcasing some things. Yeah. Nice picture of you and Emily just in in some of your downtime. And there's one last photo that I want to show that I think is brilliant. And I use this example a lot of times when people ask for things that they can do at hybrid events, which was this idea of the hybrid wine tasting, right? So tell us a little bit about how that came about and what actually took place. Well, it was to really push the envelope, see what we could do. And so what we decided here was this was at the end of the day. So at the end of a pretty grueling day, we said goodbye to the virtual delegates, but we didn't say goodbye to all of the hubs. So again, it's flexibility of how you could work those things around. And then what had happened was that each of those hubs in Belgium, in Sweden, Poland, and in Croydon, which was our furthest one, they'd all been shipped a case of this wine. We had a sommelier that came in, and then he would do, he would talk about the wine, and each of the hubs would then say, oh, yeah, okay, I'm getting this, I'm getting that, just as you would, but we were all distanced, of course. And we wanted to see if you could take a product and kind of test it, because how useful could that be for organizations that want to put out their products and they want to test them before they actually go out into the marketplace. So this was one way of showing, actually, you can do this. The story behind that was that the wine had to be shipped at least a week before, before the event was due to take place, so that it had nicely settled. You couldn't just rush it in its travel. But yeah, a great application. One of those things that we talk about where we had good interaction coming from the other other hubs. And if one said, look, it tastes like tobacco, and somebody else says it tastes like banana, it's great. We were getting all sorts of different, connotations coming through. And it was good. It worked. You can use this with other products as well. Nick,
Ruth says here some of the highlight was the hybrid wine tasting. And I mention this often. This is a brilliant idea, and it can apply to lots of different things. And it was a special deal from one of the speakers, and he had Vineyard shipped the wine bottles across to the pods. And I think it really makes sense only for smaller events, and particularly if you have these pods, then it's great because you can have you can make a social event out of it, but then you have that interaction with the other pods. You can always send, wine to individual people's houses, because let's not forget there was a lot of random people joining us online. There was no fee or anything. I don't think there was a registration fee for the online, but and so they had people all around the world just joining in. And of course, if you know where they are, you can send them the wine in advance. So I always quote this as a brilliant idea, something that really brings people together. We're all human. We like that social side of it, and it's important not to forget about that. Just because you can do so many hours of content and make it all flashy doesn't mean that that's going to connect people. And I think a nice glass of wine really goes a long way to doing that.
Absolutely. And you find now that a lot of companies are shipping goodie bags or whatever across to virtual award dinners and those kind of things. So, that idea has really taken off. So, yeah, we had a number of different elements going on in that event. And that's why it's good to talk about it today, really, because when we see people say, oh, yeah, this is all brand new, yes, it is in terms of some of the tech, but some of the principles of what you're seeking to do are timeless, just timeless. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Duncan McOwen says, great idea for connecting remote and physical groups. And Anna says, this is amazing, guys. So
thank you.
Thank you. I think, we'd love to hear from other people watching. If you think that there's some interesting ideas in this event, let us know in the comments. If you think it's a bit dated and it wouldn't really work today, let us know as well. We'd love to hear, what's relevant and what's not. I think it's really interesting to have this discussion. Let's go back just a little bit to tell one more little element of the story, and then we can go more into the learnings, which was, why were you in that venue? And why was the internet connection so bad, and what you did about it? Because this is a fascinating story.
Oh, yes. Well, so brilliant. Thank you for that. Here we go. The story was, we were on a shoestring, as I said. Elling Hamso and Rosa Garriga, they were basically doing a return on investment training course. They were doing that for the 4 days, Monday to Thursday of the week. And Elling did a super deal along with Rude, I think, as well. And they basically said to the venue, look, we've got this extra event coming on a Friday. Can you do a super nice rate for it? And of course, and the venue said, yeah, it's business, why not? And that's how we came to be there. So we were in the middle of the country in Hertfordshire in England. We were probably
beautiful setting. It's a nice place to go to for a one-day event. Absolutely, no complaints.
Absolutely. There. So it's about 40 miles north of London, just to give you that kind of guide. But the walls, the venue itself, didn't lend itself in any way to streaming or Wi-Fi, because the building was so thick. It went back to the 13th century. I think it was haunted as well. So what we did, because we needed to have that dedicated stream, as indeed everybody needs to have today, if they want to live stream without any interruption, don't depend on the Wi-Fi because it won't work. You need that secure connection. And we ended up contracting in a chap who sat in his little van outside the venue, and he had a satellite broadcast gizmo set up. Not quite sure how it all worked together, but basically the venue had to agree to have that connected up to them, which they very graciously did as well. I think the hotel manager actually scrambled over the roof to connect everything up. It was a little
Yeah, I
bit
remember,
makeshift,
because I
but,
only showed up the next day, and I remembered somebody telling me that there was somebody throwing a cable over the roof at one
that's it.
point, and there was some other stuff happening. I mean, that
We
was
we were
impressive stuff.
lucky. We were lucky, but we were also on a mission. And event profs, when they get a mission, a bit like with the GMID Goes Virtual Challenge this year, you can move a lot of ground. You can get a lot of people on side if you're really
Yep.
enthusiastic. But also, if you're doing things that want to go to the next level, and that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to be stuck on that hurdle. So there's a lot of
Yep.
preparation, Miguel, that goes into these events that sometimes is underestimated by people.
Yeah.
It's not the same as having any kind of easy meeting that you can have. So the amount of preparation that went in was quite phenomenal. And that is a great diagram of all the kind
Yeah,
of
Rude was
inputs and
mentioning it
outputs
here.
and, yeah.
In the comments, he's saying about the
Yeah.
text sketch of what's happening. So I thought I'd bring it up on the screen. This isn't quite the photo that you meant, Rude, but I think this one actually, at least it's the right way round, which is helpful as well. But this is, I think, you on stage explaining what was happening, and there's like the
Yeah.
image of all the crazy connections that are happening there. So I'm guessing this
Yeah.
is the hub somewhere in the middle, and the pods and the sound and the video and everything that's coming together. And it's really kind of interesting to just see how complex that was. So yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Very good. Good. Yes. Ruth says, ha ha ha, the tech setup is hilarious. So great to do
It
that.
certainly was. We couldn't have the
Definitely
sound bouncing back down. We couldn't have the sound echoing after us. That would have been really
Yeah.
a bit crazy. So, yeah.
And Ruth says the latency of the line was 30 times of what it is today, but we still made it work. I imagine, doing something like what we're doing right now at that time was completely out of the question, but somehow we still made it all work. So I think it was great.
It was a
Just
bit
want to
mad.
give a few shout outs to Rajani, who's joining us from India. Thank you, Rajani, for joining us again. Hopefully this is early enough for you to join, which is great. And Patrick Delaney has to shoot off to another meeting, but he enjoyed reminiscing and seeing the pioneering role of lab rats played there. So
Thank you, Patrick.
thank you so much for being with us. So I'd love to see if there's any questions from the audience. Ruud, thank you for filling in and connecting the dots of anything that we'd missed. He said very shoestring and sticky tape is one of the comments from Ruud. I think we're proud of our shoestring and sticky tape, or you should be, because it worked very well. And if we're still talking about it today, then it definitely made an impact. And Ingrid says, glad tech professionalized. Yes, so are we. I think we were. This was at the start of a lot of the things that we now use. So I think it's great to see how things have developed and how it's just easier to use a lot of these tools. I think connecting things like this to a Google Hangout in 2011 was not the easiest thing in the world. It wasn't simply like, oh, we'll just take a camera and plug it in here and that's done. There was a lot of kind of finessing and figuring it all out. So it's kind of interesting. So we're here really to talk about the learnings, because we all love reminiscing, but why is this important? And I'd love to just get a sort of overview of your thoughts on this, Paul, about what are the major learnings from this event, and how can we apply them to events today? Because that's really what we're trying to do, right? I mean, we could replicate this event with better technology, and I think it would still be a great event, but what would you do differently? How would you improve on this?
How would I improve on this? Well, I think the fundamental question of why you're even having an event, what you want as outcomes, what you're looking to do for your stakeholders is still the key consideration. Because I think sometimes you could, people can get swept away by, will the tech do this? Will it do that? Will it do something else? But I think you have to go to the core. What are you trying to achieve? And then you can start to design. So I'm always platform agnostic when it comes to any work on virtual or hybrid events, because to me it makes sense to find out what are we trying to do. And then, if you're trying to do something that you think is, it's going to keep people's attention, but it really won't, then you're not going anywhere. I've got some clients that have decided, we need to put a poll in. I said, why? Why do you need to put the poll in? Well, it keep people engaged. Well, not necessarily. So I want everybody to really think about what it is that they're trying to do. Why are you trying to bring these people together in this format? And then I think, Miguel, that we need to be looking at the way that events work for all sorts of organizations. So we no longer have in-person events as the only option. Used to be for quite a number of years, but now clearly it isn't. And we have virtual events, and we also have hybrid events where we combine both in-person and virtual. And I think we need to be smarter when it comes to delivering for our clients. We need to be saying to them, look, what are you trying to do? And then we come in and say, well, actually, a virtual event will work there. A hybrid event will be better over here. Or maybe it's a straightforward in-person. I think we need to mix it up a lot more. And I really get a little frustrated at times when there's kind of one type is better than another type. Yes, they are better, but according to the purpose. But that shouldn't stop us from putting them forward for our clients. So I think it's always got to come back to that fundamental question. Why on earth is this organization even thinking about bringing people together? And then let's have a look at our situation. So right now, when we come out of the coronavirus, when we start heading towards people coming back into events, if they're not at scale, in-person events, then hybrid hubs, as we've just shown, 10 years ago, make sense, because that means that you can have people that travel locally, maybe to a function, and they can still integrate with all the virtual audience. And I think also, if we've been looking at virtual delegates for the last year, saying, okay, we really need you to help us. If you then were to go back and say, right, in-person events are the only way forward, then you're cutting off a big section. So I think those days are past. One of the other
really interesting. Let me just add a few comments that are coming up with what you're saying there, which I think is really interesting. Robert Dunsmore, thank you for joining us. Robert says, maybe the tech evolves and the human is a constant. And I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. And very interesting to see how that changes. James has a question, but I'll come to that a little bit later. Ingrid says conscious design is key, which I think is really interesting. And Kai Troll, thank you for watching. Kai, indeed, Paul, many non-industry funded associations, hybrid events don't necessarily become the norm. I think that's really interesting, and it would be interesting also to explore the reasons why. We've had Sina come on a few weeks ago, talk about the ICA Congress, which was a pretty impressive example of a hybrid event with hubs, I think 8 or 9 hubs throughout the world, and a very complex schedule of events happening at different time and kind of local social happenings where they could happen, I think also taking place, which was really interesting. And also PCMA just did their convening leaders with a big hub in Singapore, and I think another one in the US as well, where physical events were possible. So we are doing this, but it's not that common. And I think the organizers have realized how complex this really is. This is not something that you just sort of go, we'll go hybrid, it'll be fine. And it's like, well, actually, that's pretty complex. And I remember speaking to Daniel Weigel a while ago from Circe. They do a 20 or 30,000 person event normally, and they consciously opted not to go hybrid. They did a fully virtual event this year because they realized how complex going hybrid was. In their mind, they were saying it's more like running 3 events, because you'd have a physical event, you'd have an online event, and then you have kind of an extra team to figure out how to connect those 2 things together. And I thought that was a really, really smart and a really conscious decision, because I think a lot of people are saying go hybrid, that's the future. But then when you really get down to it, I don't know if those people understand the complexity that they're suggesting, really.
I think that's right. And I think some of the jargon that's used, or the language, can really trip people up as well, because sometimes people talking hybrid really mean virtual, and vice versa. So we find that. But also, I think that's very true, and that's why I wanted to make that point about being able to choose from what's at your disposal, because it isn't going to work for every client, depending on what they need. And I think actually, to Robert's point, that the human is constant, that's very true. If I go to a virtual event, I want it to be really pretty perfect just for me, because that's what I want, that's what I might be paying for. And I'm not interested in, okay, what might be going on with the in-person experience. And we've really found that as well. When we did Event Camp Europe, we found, I called it audience envy. And maybe that was a bit too strong, but you know, if the people in that location in Hertfordshire found that actually, you know what, Emily is doing such a good job for the virtual audience, I'm feeling I'm not getting enough from it, then you know, you have that other dynamic going on as well. So all things to consider. But I think what this gives us, it does, you're right, it does give us more scope. The Swedish guys, the Swedish pod, they also invited somebody to come along and to give them a separate lunchtime lecture. So when we broke, I think, for lunch, they had somebody that they wheeled in as a speaker. So again, it was another flexibility in their programming. So whilst you can have a hybrid event, you don't need to have everything the same throughout, and you shouldn't, but you can bring things together and then take them away. So there's all sorts of things you can do with this. But I think the key difference is that to understand how to put on a virtual event, you need to be in a kind of TV show producing mindset, because once you've got that, you've moved away from the on stage style of in-person events, and then you have to bring both of those elements back when you make the hybrid. So you're right, there's a lot of complexity, but it does depend on, you know, what you want for your organization, because if you had a few clusters and a lot of virtual audience, maybe that's good for you. It just depends on your scenario, you know. We're not saying this is the only way, and it shouldn't be the only way, but with climate change and sustainable issues, I think we might be seeing a few more of these come up.
Absolutely. I think James makes an interesting point here as well. It says, think broadcast and how they use studio audiences to provide an emotional engagement element to the virtual attendees. I think that's a good point. And you know, a lot of times we think more about hybrid events, more of like studio productions, like film productions, rather than traditional sort of in-person events. But I wanted to also mention one thing. You know, it was good that we talked about being lab rats at this particular event, because the in-person experience, you know, the wine tasting, the croquet, the kind of venue side of it was great, but the actual live experience sometimes isn't ideal, because there's a bit of be quiet in the front row because we can hear you in the for the online audience, because we're doing the interviews right here. So, you know, when you bill it as lab rats, I think that's okay, because you understand that everything's a bit experimental. But if you're charging a lot of money for the in-person experience, and then that experience is not as good as if it was just in person, I think it's quite dangerous there, because you're not really making a VIP experience. You're kind of, hey, we're happy that you're here, but now you just have to be a studio audience and applaud when we want you to. And I think it's really hard to maintain that balance, right? How do you give that VIP experience, but then also get people to understand that there's, you know, limitations that maybe wouldn't be there if it was just a physical event?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and observation as well. And I think, you know, I've been to some TV shows where I have been there as a member of the studio audience, and you're dead right. You are told, don't laugh to yourself. I want to hear you laugh out loud, because obviously that gets picked up by all of the microphones and everything else. So if you're going to, what happened with our event was that we did have just that as well. So Emily would be doing an interview with with one of the speakers for the virtual audience, but because at that time the microphone that we were using was one that went out into the room and couldn't just be kept to her, we found other people for the in-person experience started to sit there and listen to what she was saying as well, which is quite interesting. But that was the lab rat piece. But for the VIP element, I think you've got to be looking at every single part of that user journey, every single part of what you're really getting them to do, and then you will start to get rid of those issues of friction. So that's where you do design your two programs, one with your virtual delegates in mind and one with the in-person delegates in mind, and where they come together and when they come apart. that's the only way I think you can make everybody feel warm and fuzzy, because nobody, to Robert's point, the human is constant, because we all want to, feel like we're the most important person on the block. That's just natural. So, we're bound to complain if we have a shoddy virtual experience when all the money was given on the in person, or vice versa. So you've got to get really cute with your programming.
Really balance it out. Question here from James Morgan, who's watching. Do we market virtual events in the same way as live events? Kind of an interesting question. Any thoughts on that, Paul?
Do we market them in the same way? You can use some of the same techniques, but I think you have to be really clear on, okay, because this is a virtual event, this means that X, Y, and Z is going to be happening. You're going to be required. I think you just have to manage the expectations and make it crystal clear that this is going to be a different experience to an in-person one. And if you're worried about the length of time that some people may be enjoying it, then you've got to be upfront about that as well, and maybe look at the programming that's going on. So I think you can market it, but it's not going to be the same, because it can't be, can it?
Yeah, I think he's gone a little bit of a different angle here to James's question. But I think part of his question is also about the expectations, right? Because when you're saying kind of like, hey, we're gonna show up and we're gonna be hybrid, or we're gonna show up and we're gonna do different things. And if you market it as a lab rat, then it's okay. If you market it as a VIP experience, it's okay. And I think the kind of dedication that everybody has to their own, when you're watching a virtual event, just like this one, really, if you want to call this an event, people are free to pop in at any time, right? When you're doing physical, it's a bit different. And hybrids, of course, you kind of get both versions. So I guess, does that affect the marketing? I assume it kind of affects the promise that you make, right? Because you're kind of making a promise to the people attending that is either, we're gonna deliver some great entertainment for the whole time, or we're gonna give you some content and you can drop in and out. I mean, where do you see that? It's kind of a minefield, because you can have all sorts of different types of events with different things. But it also depends on how you set the expectations, right? And I think everybody's kind of trying to get people to register, but I don't see a lot of marketing setting expectations for what the event is going to be like. It's like, we expect you to be on camera and do this and do that. I don't think a lot of people go into that sort of detail, and maybe that's something that we're missing, because I do log into a lot of events and expect one thing or another, and sometimes kind of go, oh, I wasn't really ready for that. I'm going to leave now, especially when it's kind of like very turn on your camera, do your thing. Like, oh, wait, I didn't know I was going to be on camera now. So I think that's an interesting element to it.
I think that's right. I think in virtually there's always been a lot of hand-holding in terms of in-person events, but the amount that you need to do for virtual and hybrid is just off the scale, because if you assume that everybody knows what you do and they work their technology in the same way, then you're really going to struggle and have a problem. And I think managing those expectations of like, okay, you're going to come in, you're going to join this event, that's great. What happens next would be useful to know. Now, some organizations decided, okay, well, we'll get a facilitator on, he can welcome everybody and say, put your camera on, give us a wave, say who you are. A lot of people will not be able to cope with that, because it's just like, whoa, hold on, that's full on. I haven't even started, I haven't got the first coffee. I don't even know if I want to do that. And bearing in mind, Miguel, that you are, and I think your expression was really good when you said that the event is a guest in your home. This whole event is a guest in my home right now, because you're seeing this room. So if you're going to use your attendees that have just registered for a virtual event, and suddenly all of their clothing and everything else and their partners or whatever are in view, that's a bit scary. So I think we do have to be much more on it when it comes to, well, what does this mean, and what should I be doing? Maybe it's not in marketing, but it's certainly in the expectation management of, this is how you get on. And I think one of the other things is that we need to be managing their expectations in terms of Do they need to download things? Do they need to get an app? What do they need to be doing so that they're ready to go? Because
Apps.
otherwise
Haven't
you
heard
lose
about
them.
apps for a while now. They feel a little out of fashion at the moment. But absolutely, do you have to
Yeah,
download something? What do you have to prepare? Yeah.
yeah.
So a couple of things that I normally say, and I think just to paraphrase those or to confirm those. One thing is I say that when you're doing online events, so virtual events, the event is a guest in somebody's house,
Yeah.
and that really changes the way you do things because I can step aside from my computer, I can go do something else, and if the event is not holding my attention, I don't. It doesn't really bother me, right? The event is the guest, and not the other way around. When you're at a physical event where you are the guest, and you're expected to things are expected to happen, and you expect a certain amount of comfort, etc. But also, Robert actually brings something that I've started saying a lot as well: best seat in the house, which I think is very true. Which I like to phrase this as when you're doing a virtual event, you're in a front row seat, right? Or everybody has a front row seat, even, which is great, right? Because you have a great view of all the content and you can hear everything really clearly, etc. But at the same time, it can be really daunting because if you think about it, when you're in a massive theater at an event and you're in the front row, nobody wants to sit in the front row, right? And there's a reason for that because you might get picked on, or or you're very visible. And I think when you're doing events online and you are like camera on in a meeting, it's the same thing. You're in a front row seat, and not everybody wants to be in a front row seat. And you don't really have that option unless you kind of turn off your camera and you're like, oh, I'm just, my camera's not working today. I mean, the amount of times you hear that excuse and you're like, yeah, okay, you're just doing your emails on another screen or something, and that's fine. But everybody's got a front row seat, which I think is really interesting. Whoa, and we have the elusive Liz Rice has
Liz
joined
Rice.
us. Liz, thank you for joining us. Because I wonder whether venues are ready for hybrid. If we continue with spacing requirements for the foreseeable future, the banqueting returns will be so much lower for large spaces with small audience. How commercially viable will hybrid really be? I think this is a really interesting question, and obviously from the industry perspective, from the venue and from the catering perspective, it's not a good place to be, right? Because if we could have as large events as possible in the past, that doesn't look like it's going to be possible, at least for the near future. So it's very tricky. I don't know if there's a positive answer to this for those companies, but I think that there's also a way to flip this round in a sense. And I don't know if you agree, Paul, but let's say I'm a big venue and I do have the capability of splitting up that space into smaller spaces. I think that there's some interesting potential there. I think it's hard to do, but if you imagine large events that are happening, or even like important online events for multiple associations and things like that, if local groups of people who can, legally meet would join together in small pod events, I think there's a good chance of venues being used and hotel spaces and suites and that thing being used for those pods. They don't have to be big, 6, 8 people, whatever it is, but it already has a sort of social interaction that everybody's missing. And I don't know if the catering or the room spend would be anywhere near equivalent. Probably a lot more organizing to do. But there's apps for that. There's algorithms. Hopefully we'll get there soon enough. But I do think that a lot of these spaces can really get some benefits, at least from having options to be studios, to be places where people record or transmit sessions from, but also to be pod spaces. So if you imagine a large, Excel or something like that, if that can be subdivided and different pods and different sort of live studios can be happening in different parts of the venue, I think there's interesting options there. I don't think that they're anywhere near covering all the spend that we have seen in the past. But it's damn a lot better than having the venues closed essentially.
Well, that's right, and I think you're right on the money with that. Because when I was speaking to James Reese only recently, where we did an interview, he was saying that Excel has been subdivided into a number of production areas for the film companies now for a number of months, and that's what they've been doing. They also know that the cluster events are coming in small size. So I think there's a real shift. And I think what's commercially viable to venues probably may not be the same as commercially viable to organizations, pushing their staff across the globe, because if they found different ways of doing things, they may not be even wanting to do that anymore to anywhere near the degree that they used to. So I think this whole period has changed what we do and how we do it. So I think venues that can adapt to that are going to be the ones that definitely come out better. And that maybe there are hologram studio, maybe there is hologram stuff that goes on, but hybrid studios, recording studios, they are so going to be needed as well. And James,
James says here, extends this a little bit. Venues need to create other revenue streams, such as broadcast production studios, graphic designers, etc. So, whilst maybe in the past venues had extra services around, I don't know, stand building or something like that, I think maybe now it's more about having those creative people, connections with creative people that can do the graphic design, the TV side, the AV, I think is very, very important.
Yeah.
Really good point. I wanted to go back to a question from Yvonne Moguet, who says, I'm on the consumer side working in the marketing of a chemical B2B company. I agree with Paul that a careful assessment of the customers' need and expectations, but also their awareness of technical limits is really important. So definitely brilliant. On the money there, Paul. Yeah,
absolutely. That comment, it can be easy sometimes for us as organizers or producers to say, this is straightforward, they just need to do X, Y, and Z. But that in itself could be a whole world of pain, depending on who your people are and what kind of, level of understanding there are on certain technologies. So that's why the virtual hand-holding has to be really, really before.
Assume no previous knowledge and communicate all the way, right? It's better to over communicate than to assume that anybody knows anything, really.
Just don't send out an email with one.
A 16-page email with everything in there. Then exactly. That's nobody's going to read. Liz says, good to hear from you both. Busy balancing work, life, and homeschooling. This was my lunchtime interlude. Very enjoyable. Thank you, Liz. I'm very happy to have made a good lunchtime interlude for you. I think that's definitely one of the nicer comments.
10 years ago, Liz.
Exactly. Thank you, Liz, for sponsoring this event. Robert Dunsmore says, employ a creative, you can do it. I think that's referring back to some of the comments we made earlier. We have Duncan also saying, also for hybrid, there may be a perception of reduced value for sponsors, exhibitors who historically have bought based on physical audience size and profile. I think this is a brilliant, very interesting comment. I think this is probably something we need another hour to really go into. But I think, again, with the venue questions, I think that there's interesting opportunities. And I've heard a lot of comments lately about being able to tap into audiences. So using virtual events as a way to attract a certain community that you want to attract, which isn't necessarily always easy to do on your own. And then being able to move that community or whoever wants to connect with you as an exhibitor into a sales pipeline or into a CRM system, whatever it is that your company uses. So, in a way, it's like, yes, the opportunities are maybe less or they're different, but if there's a way of making that transition from, a community into potential clients, if that's smoother, if that's easier to do, then there are also gains to be had there, right? If you don't have to travel and build an exhibition and prepare people to do sales presentations, etc., but do more the online version. Again, I'm not trying to take business away from any sort of physical company, but this is where we are right now. I think that there's gains to be had there. And whilst companies may not at this point be willing to pay as much, I think the more you can sort of make an exhibition integrate into the way they do sales, the more you can kind of, benefit them. And I think that's going to grow easier and easier as we go forward.
I think that's dead right. And I think there are opportunities there for sponsors and exhibitors. In-person event, you're going to get a lot of people that come, probably waste your time. When you're in the virtual world, not saying that they won't as well, but you are only going as somebody that's that's interested in that company's products or services. So as long as you've got ability to deal with their inquiry, then they should be a really useful ground for gaining business. no doubt at all.
Perfect.
But I think they
Yeah.
might also need to change the way that they approach in terms of coming out with different things for virtual rather than it's on our website. Because so what, I could look at your website, I want to know what's new, what are you telling me that's different.
Absolutely. Paul, that's us.
Can't
That's
believe
us.
it.
We're on the hour. It goes quick,
I'm
doesn't
looking
it?
at the
So,
clock.
so
That's
it's been.
unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's actually a great segue because I'm having our common friend Adam Parry is going to be joining us next week on the 4th of February, which is a Thursday, and I'll be interviewing him about EventTech Live that happened in November of last year, and he has some plans for doing EventTech Live this year, which will be very much an exhibition, a B2B trade show for event technology. So I think it'll be a great time. All of everybody, Nunu, thank you for your question. Sorry we didn't get to it, but Duncan as well. These questions about how to provide exhibitor value. The next session, I think, will go into a lot of detail around that, about what's possible, what may be coming in the future. So do please join me for that. It'll be at 4 o'clock Central European time on Thursday, the 4th of February. Paul, thank you so much for being with me today and reminiscing about this event, which I think is fascinating. Hopefully we made a good point about why it's relevant and why it's interesting. And the last thing I want to remind everybody that there is a virtual events wiki where I keep all the episodes of Cooking Up Virtual Events, and you can watch them on demand here, and there's links to all of them over here, so you can see all the previous episodes, and this one will be on there shortly. And also you have a big list of virtual event tools, so if you're looking for platforms, trying to understand what works, what doesn't, this is a resource that I've put online completely for free. Just go to that website, virtualevents.wiki, to have a look at that. And if you can do one thing for me, which would be great, is to sign up for the newsletter. There is a quick sign up form just below here, and you can sign up so we can tell you about the upcoming streams. That makes it much easier to invite everybody. I do try to invite everybody on LinkedIn, but it is a pain in the backside to click on everybody's name. So I would love you to sign up to the newsletter if you think that is of value to you. But thank you very much for joining us. A few people I'm sure have already left for other meetings, but it's been a pleasure, Paul. Hopefully you'll be a viewer and a participant in future sessions as well. And I look forward to doing more of these Cooking Up Virtual Events with any events. If you know of a cool virtual event that you'd like to have featured on here, get in touch, let me know. And till next time, let's keep talking about virtual events. All the best. Thank you very much.
Thanks.